All right, everyone, thank you. Now, again, good evening. So
Good
here
evening.
we are on our Zoom meeting on June 3rd. And before we start talking about the text, I have to say that I think that there's hardly a person, certainly on our Zoom meeting or anywhere much, who isn't in a state of grief right now about the condition of our country and the great sadness that has befallen our country in so many different ways. And so I sent out an email this afternoon with a newsletter. The Soto Zen Buddhist Association has written a statement about racism, systemic racism. And so they are asking us to take a look at that and to perhaps form some kind of action. They're asking for a call to action so that all of the member temples will have some concrete responses to work on our own systemic issues around racism. What we have done in past years is about every 5 years or so, we have read a particular document that teaches us about all of the forms of privilege that are afloat in our nation. And so we have worked with that, and it has been pretty good for us to be able to think about how white privilege is blind to racism, to gender issues, to problems of age, disabilities, all of the age, did I say age, disability, gender, race, religion, and so that we are aware in our own practice about how we are going about our own lives together as Buddhists, and whether we are remaining blind to it, or whether we are assisting these privileges to continue, or whether we are awake to them and able to stem them in our own practice and in the world when we meet them. So I'm going to ask for a Zoom meeting sometime that we will let people know about, and we'll just have a conversation about what kind of action we ourselves can take. There are some suggestions in that email that are certainly things that we could do, and but we might have some particular creative responses that would work for our particular community. You know, in Olympia, we have a very small percentage of people of color, and it's been very hard for people of color to remain in this community because it is so white. And so, you know, we wonder what it is that we do that causes people of color to move away. And so, so it's something we need to look at, some concern. We have a few people of color in our membership, and that's it. And so we need to ask whether we are behaving in such a way, whether we are unconsciously preventing people of color from feeling comfortable to be in our midst. And of course, we are also very Japanese in culture. And I often think that Zen has a particular culture that is not easy to come into. So we can talk about it, and I'd like to do that in a upcoming Zoom meeting together, and to hear people's ideas about what we can do, how we as on the top of the heap white privilege can address systemic racism. So, you know, I urge you to continue to sit and to pray and to be aware of what is going on. Very difficult. Today, the demonstrations all over the world are by and large peaceful demonstrations, but today is the 9th day in which people are demonstrating in the United States. And the crowds remain huge, and it's deeply effective, I do believe. So I think that it has to continue for our people in government to actually believe it. And so great power to those who are out on the street. Among us, I only know of one person here who actually walked, and that's Calvin, who walked in the group in Olympia the other night, until it was clear that it was moving from families with children to a much more heated exchange. And so Calvin left at that point very wisely. And but I don't know, has anybody else walked in a demonstration at all? Yeah, difficult thing to do. And also if you are member of a family, if there is no social distancing in the groups, so it's you certainly take your chances. And if you do, please mask up and please wash your hands. Bring some stuff with you to keep your hands clean as you go. So if anybody has anything to add about this, please, yeah. Okay, well, thank you. So now I wonder if you've got any thoughts about the last chapter that we were on, and whether, chapter 2, and whether you've got any thoughts about any other questions that might have come up for you before we move into section 3, part 4, actually. Okay, all right, so we are working now with page 125 up to the bottom of 129. So the first one tonight is the functions of the body, speech, and thought. So Roshi tells us immediately that it's more than just sitting on the cushion. The functions of the body, speech, and thought are also Zazen. The body, the posture, how we sit, the body as the observer of the skandhas. And then there's the Zazen of speech. And this becomes more difficult as we move we get off the cushion, and then we move through our day. And so the Zazen of speech becomes a little bit more complicated for us. And then the Zazen of thought is yet another problematic realm in which we engage that is difficult for us as we stand up and move through the day. Nevertheless, all that we do and all that we are, Roshi proposes, is Zazen itself. So this is a question that we ask frequently. So what do you do when you get off the cushion? And I guess the response that Roshi might give is that you continue Zazen. As you move through the day, you continue your Zazen. But at the same time, we sit on the cushion. We return to the cushion for that practice of silence, that practice of examining the mind, examining the way in which the mind operates to try to see through to the bottom of that activity, to see our own delusions, to see the way in which we organize our life and devise various methods that we think are necessary. And so this life that we have engaged in Zen practice is no easy undertaking, because it encompasses all of our life. And it's really difficult. It's a difficult practice, and difficult to see the extent of that and all-encompassing nature of it. So, so any questions about that part?
I guess I mean it's hard for me, like in this day, to not relate this back to like social justice and how like categorically different these two types of being seen, where it's like in Zen it's not enough to like intellectualize one's understanding, but it's like sort of like the moment you engage the world, it's like then there's like intellectual things that you must do, such as understand one's own privilege and one's own wake in the world, which I think is an intellectual matter ultimately. So to me, it's like interesting to find that balance point between the two. And I think just sort of, I mean, to bypass that is dangerous.
Well, I think that if, as we've gone through this book, I think that that Harada Roshi isn't asking us to exactly turn that off, but that balance, you know, we talk about that balancing that we do, that we negotiate every single moment in trying to find that balance of awakening and in the world, the absolute world and the relative world. And we are always negotiating that, always trying to find that balance. And so I think our practice is to be aware that we are doing that, to be aware that we are negotiating that balance. To me, that is what brings us to be able to put together the relative and the absolute by being aware that it's a balance and that we must go back and forth. I mean, as we emerge into the world, we have to know we're driving. We have to be able to think about what we're going to buy at the supermarket, et cetera. There are a million things that we have to be aware of. But the question is how we are balanced at some equanimity in that continual exchange that we must do. And I think Harada Roshi is suggesting that, or if he's not, I am. And I think we get that from Hee-Jin Kim. And it's always, he talks about the, I forget what word he uses for the balance, but it is this negotiation, continual negotiation of being aware when we are in an intellectual mode and when we realize that the third eye is opened, to be able to be aware of that, I think is what he is asking for. And, you know, it's a way of, the third eye open is a way of saying that we are in the pre-perception mode. We are prior to perception, means the third eye is open. So to know when that is the case in our own minds, I think is the skillful action that we are all practicing toward. Most of us are not there, but to practice toward that is skillful means.
I guess it's helpful for me to sort of, it's like, I feel like there is like obviously an advantage to doing that. And like increasing one's ability to sort of, I think, be more spontaneous and creative ultimately. Mm-hmm. But I feel like one of it's like I have a set of experiences of training here where it's like, I think when people first find Zen, there's like this impetus to link like what they experience meditatively to Zazen. And I feel like that's sort of one of the hurdles that people go through. It's like really like there's only one thing that's Zazen, and it's Zazen.
Mm.
And as much as that inoculates your life, like nothing else is that. And so I think as much as like spiritual communities want like greater awareness to innately be anti-oppressive, it is not. I think maybe I, it's sort of like unlocking your potential either way. And I think spiritual traditions seem to make people sort of innately more moral and community minded. But I don't think of that as the same as anti-oppressive. As I think the history of religious traditions makes clear.
Mm. Well,
Mistakes that have been made by prior masters.
there have been profound mistakes made in just about every religion, every organized religion, every religious institution has had some form of racism or privilege or mistreatment of people. So has Zen practice. So Soto Zen Buddhism itself has been the keepers of the secret documents, the secret addresses of the untouchables in Japan, and have prevented the untouchables from even buying a house, marrying, getting a reasonable job. And that existed, that particular book existed up until 1990 when I was there in Japan. And only then did Soto Zen Buddhism determine that those books that revealed the addresses where people, where the untouchables lived, because they were pushed into those sections of cities, and they were kept in secret books so they could look up who lived where. And so finally those books would be destroyed. And that was pretty recent, 1990. So we ourselves in Soto Zen Buddhism have participated in that. Also gender issues are very strong and still continue. So certainly we can look just to our own religion and see whether we can work toward an awareness that would relieve us of those sufferings that are created by those privileges, unconscious privileges. And I don't know what else we could do. I don't think we could just say that it's okay. And that, that's my feeling, is that it has to be looked at. So I don't know if that is exactly what you're saying, Will. All we can do is do our best to see the areas in which we ourselves are unconsciously acting to segregate ourselves, to separate ourselves, to allow people to be uncomfortable in our midst. I think we have to try.
Edo-san, you used the word unconscious, and
Yes.
the unconscious bias for me points to the necessity of relationship, so that to the extent I'm able on my own to see what I can see, there's that. But I'll never be able to, I don't think, be able to see it all unless I'm in relationship with other people who can mirror something, demonstrate something to me, or reveal something to me that I am blind to otherwise.
Yes.
All the while, striving towards greater awareness at the same time. I don't want to suggest that it relieves me of my responsibility, but I don't know if I could personally achieve it without being in relationship.
Yeah, very, very good point. I mean, I have certainly held particular thoughts, and maybe I've been with somebody who pointed out what my view was, and I had to look at the view that I held at that moment. And that is because of relationships, or because collectively we make a whole. And the point of Sangha, for instance, is to polish our own character by brushing up against one another, by feeling the difficulties that we get together. Our character is polished. And so when Roshi talks about Zazen of speech and Zazen of thought, this is what we are talking about, that we engage with other Sangha who essentially save us from our problematic kinds of thinking. And that's what it's about. He says something to that effect somewhere along here about this. But in any event, this is then, essentially what we are talking about is the Zazen of speech and mind, speech and thought. Are we able to push through to see the nature of our own speech, to push through to see the nature of our own thought, and then to not hold opinions in such a way that creates suffering? I mean, it's fairly simple in one sense. So, and very difficult, extremely difficult. I mean, right now we're all, shouldn't say we all, me, we have opinions about what's going on in our country and how we should solve these issues. And so, very, very difficult. Difficult not to have an opinion about our leader, our non-leader. I mean, who doesn't have an opinion about that one? It's extremely difficult not to take a side in that, to watch those actions and not have an opinion. So Zazen, on and off the cushion in all actions then is our practice. And however, he does at the bottom of this paragraph, he says, since the reality now is divided in two, subject and object, the thought arises that there is no need to do Zazen, that we don't have to sit on the cushion if I'm walking around and doing Zazen while I'm thinking or speaking. And he said, we must be careful about this. This was Dogen Zenji's. Dogen Zenji had a very difficult time with this. His koan, essentially, which took him to China, was that if we are all enlightened, what is the need to sit Zazen? Why should we have to practice? Why should I have to curl myself into this painful position and sit in this way if we are all enlightened? And of course, he went to China and he worked with his teacher, and he came to understand that Zazen and the practice of Zazen itself is awakening. But that awakening must be manifested in all of our actions, not just on the cushion. It must be manifested in speech and thought. And that is why it is so very, very difficult. And if enlightenment is not manifested, it's meaningless. So when in our morning, when we are finishing our dedication, we offer our practice to all Buddhas in past, present, and future. May its merit be directed toward, it's in the last part, manifested, realized, practiced, and manifested. So it's all of those. If it doesn't extend into the world, it's meaningless. And that is our ongoing life as we go about our day. Great difficulty. Now, there's a curious thing then on page 126. And Dogen, after his awakening, he cast off body and mind. And that at that time, he said, the eyes lie horizontal. The nose stands vertical. I will not be deceived by others. The Buddha Dharma does not exist in the least. Well, that's a bit of a conundrum to consider that. What exactly is he meaning? And who is the I of I will not be deceived by others? Is he meaning his small self he will not allow his small self, the small I, to be deceived by others? And then the Buddha Dharma does not exist in the least? Well, what does that mean? What is that? Does it mean that it's insubstantial? That the Buddha Dharma essentially is not visible, but yet is invisibly who we are?
The way I take it,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's locating you in someone. It's the person is like locating themselves in their own meditation to a point at which, like, their meaning making is coming from an internal sense.
Okay.
And not being externally imported is sort of how I take that.
Okay, that's good. That's very good. Yeah. So if as Harada Roshi has also been pointing out, that as soon as we make it into something, we've made a mistake. So in that sense, the Buddha Dharma is not something that is an object of any kind. Are you meaning it in that way?
I mean, it's like, because it's like Zazen is so easy, but then it's like the expression of it is so fine. Because it's like, I mean, to communicate it is sort of distinguish what it is from what it isn't, and to like communicate it to another person. And I think it's sort of a warning against like taking someone else's version. Is sort of how it resonates in me.
Okay. Yeah, anyone else speak to that?
I was thinking of it as the Buddha Dharma is prior to perception. And in that sense, there's not existence or not existence and not non-existence, because those are concepts. Those are things that we have made in our minds, those are words. And it gets us away from that, the seeing, the skandhas, the action of the seeing and the hearing and the tasting, the touching.
Right.
And,
Okay. Yeah. Both. Yeah. Both good ways to look to that, to express a response to that. Yeah. So in the next paragraph, it just says willows are green and flowers are red. All human beings are endowed with Buddha nature. So these are just simple statements, unequivocally, that there is no mistake in these statements, either before or after body and mind cast off. Those statements mean that, body and mind cast off. So as you know, both of you allude to, that these are speaking from Zazen and are also prior to any notion of object. So, yeah, so, and from the vantage, his very next sentence, from the vantage point of the Dharma, everything is empty. So, of course, it would stand in emptiness. And then he finishes that paragraph. And if you've got anything in there, please jump in. But he finishes that paragraph. It is in order to completely wash away the intervention of the ego self that Zazen is so necessary. So the intervention of the mind that thinks things up, as it were, that disorganizes us in some way, or that causes us to create difficulties in our lives. The question of intervention of the ego self. And in Zazen, we are able to sit in an egoless way. We are able to sit in the pre-perception, so that with a bit of luck, when we get off the cushion, we can take that practice with us. With a bit of actual hard work and practice, we can take that with us.
So I'll ask this as a question.
Yep.
The intervention of the ego self
Yes.
is the same as perception arising, where if something is perceived, then there are two.
Correct.
There's me and there's something else. The intervention of the ego self is the same, synonymous with perception.
That's correct. This is Harada's Roshi's teaching. Yeah. Yeah. And
Sorry.
yeah, go ahead, Brian.
Something I've been thinking about here, and in the context of race equity, washing away the intervention of the ego self. I guess when we were reading the prior section, I was thinking about, particularly in the context of what's going on right now all around us, is that, institutional oppression is institutional because it's so deeply embedded in our identity, because it's so deeply embedded in the entire cultural identity, in a way that we don't even know it's there.
Correct.
And that's an extremely subtle manifestation of the ego self. I mean, it's a very elusive it's a very elusive thing to wash away that aspect of ego self that is so deeply embedded that we don't even remember learning it, because we inherited it just through being around other people.
Right. And I mean, that is what privilege means. Privilege means is that you don't have to be conscious of being whatever privilege you hold. You don't have to go out on the street and think, hey, I'm Black and I have to be careful of what I do. You don't have to think that. A white person can walk into a store and not be followed by a detective, for instance, or can pick up objects in the store and look at them and hold them without being thought that you're going to steal them. So that's privilege. And you simply just don't have to be aware of some things in privilege. Mm-hmm. So it's extremely deep in us, extremely deep. And to, for any white person to say they are not racist would probably be a lie. Mm-hmm. We are all racist.
Well, we're all complicit in perpetuating
yes
institutions that oppress.
By all means.
Or we can't not. And just going back to what you were saying earlier, Will, too, about Edo-san, about the mistakes that have been made within religious institutions. I mean, all of these practices throughout the ages have taken place in different cultures, different times, and they've all been, I mean, it's inseparable. You can't separate the practice from the context. And whatever context you're in is going to create some delusion that can lead to harmful action, some delusion that is extremely difficult to detect.
Right. In ourselves, by all means, very difficult.
Yeah. Yeah.
So this is what the function of Sangha is, as Karen brought up. The function of the community is to save one another from our delusive thoughts and actions. For, you know, if we have a large community that is awake, we can spot this in one another and we can call it, you know, when it arises. Provided the ego does not interfere, we can receive these kinds of supports from the Sangha that keep us on that, you know, not the straight and narrow, but that keep us clean from these pitfalls, this muddy pitfall that we fall into. So it's what the function of Sangha is. One of the most, I mean, the three treasures are sublime. And the Sangha is the most difficult and the most necessary. So.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
I guess I thought of I think like another way of saying what I was, maybe a better way of saying what I was trying to get at earlier is, it seems that this practice is innately about like the nature of thought.
Yes.
So, which is fairly different from the content of thought.
Correct.
And so I think like the most anti-oppressive thing we can do as a Zen community is not to conflate our religious practice with like social justice movements. I mean, when we get up, we go out into our community and that's a dance. And I think in trying times, you sort of see like people's character. And I think character is ultimately something we can and should work on. And I think that's a lot of what this is, but it's sort of like Zazen is Zazen. It's not riding a motorcycle or spinning pottery. It's meditation. And I think thinking of anti-oppression in that way is also, it sort of does it justice, I think. To not try to make does that make sense?
Not quite for me, but maybe somebody else could, maybe for somebody else.
Well, are you saying that that we kind of, in a sense, reify something that's otherwise not really there, and we're making that an object of something that needs to be corrected?
Well, I'm a little, I guess I'm a little out of practice in like the terminologies, but I think when people talk about like anti-oppression, it sort of comes in levels and degrees. And so in some sense, like the worst level of privilege is when one is in ignorance of it. And it's sort of like the idea is like one can become aware of one's privilege, and that's not exactly the point at which you become anti-oppressive. And so there's that danger of kind of jumping the gun, as it were, of like assuming that your activity is lessening privilege when really it's just an awareness of it. I guess it's maybe not like a necessary point to make, but I think in religious communities, I think in some sense you can jump the gun and think of things as anti-oppressive when really it's that level of like inclusion, which I don't think Buddhists or like non-Christian communities face that reality nearly as much, because I think we are a minority target group as Buddhists. But at the same time, it's like making those distinctions, I think, are important.
Well, what
Which
about,
distinctions? Sorry.
Can I interrupt for 1 second? Who is this down at the bottom? Jubri?
is that Jason?
No, is that Yuta?
Yes, this is your
Oh, Yuta, I've been waiting for you. Please excuse me, everybody. This is Yuta. She is from Germany. She is in Germany. Oh, could you put
Hello,
your face
everybody.
close? Put your face close so we can see you.
Hello.
Oh my God.
I'm a little bit late because I couldn't get in. I had some problems with the email address, and so I'm a little bit late. I'm sorry.
Oh my goodness. It's 3 o'clock in the morning where Yuta is. And excuse me for interrupting this, but I knew that she might be coming and I was so excited and I kept looking at that box down there thinking, who is that? That's who it is. J-U, it had to be Yuta.
Yes. Happy to
Yuta,
be here.
yeah, I met Yuta at Felsentor in Switzerland, and then she came and stayed with us for about 3 months and lived at Olympia Zen Center quite a long time ago now. And then she moved back to Germany. So, and I have not seen her in a long time, but I promise next time I go, I will see you. I will go next year to Switzerland. So, yeah. Oh, that's great, Yuta. I'm so glad to see you.
Yuta, so good to see you. It's been years.
Oh, I think it's about 14 years now.
Yes, about that.
14 years. But also it seems like, oh, just a moment.
Indeed. So,
Great.
all right. Excuse. Are you feeling the issues in Germany about the demonstrations in the United States, Yuta?
Yes, it's coming up in the news, and a lot of violence that comes through with it, that we see now coming up in America, and it's very sad to see this explosion of violence. Yeah. And it's a big, how to say? First have to get into English again. It's a big topic in the news in Germany. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, certainly, you know, some of the behavior of our leaders, I'm sure that Germany is very wary, very concerned about the behavior of the leaders in the United States and the kinds of decisions they are making about how to control the people.
Mm-hmm.
So, all right. Okay, well, thank you. I needed that moment to see Yuta. But anyway.
Thank you, Edison.
Yeah. Great, wonderful joy to see you. And that she got up at 3 o'clock in the morning to join us.
a lot of cold water.
Yeah, right. I wrote down a German expression to be able to say to you, es ist sehr früh am Morgen.
Yes.
Anyway, wunderbar. So, all right. So anyway, excuse me, everyone. Come back to this discussion here. So I think that, you know, what you bring up, Will, is very complex and subtle and difficult. And I think there are different ways that these issues can be held. And I think that for many people, they feel the responsibility of facing the condition, the public condition we are in, and feeling that as a religious community, they have to address it, or we have to address it. So how we do that is very complex, very difficult. And I think I can agree with you in, if I'm speaking to it correctly, that we could lose our we could lose our center by going too much in that direction and not staying centered in what Zazen is.
I'm grateful for the pause because, I mean, it is sort of easy to over intellectualize these things, but I guess I think privilege is a lot. It's like there are lessons in Zen that I think apply to just life itself, because it is life itself. And I think that the danger in Zen is in some sense very similar to the danger in privilege. It's like once you think you get it, like you're in a land field, or you're in a minefield at that point.
Yes.
It's to be met continuously.
Well, I think isn't that, to me, that's that whole point of the in and the out, the looking, the pulling back, the relational. What do I think, and what am I seeing, and what other people are seeing, and what am I hearing from other people? And to me, it's the whole ball of wax. You know, it's the nature. You know, when I think about anti-oppression work, if I haven't done some of my own work in thinking about how I think, what is the nature of my thoughts, I'm going to do harm when I step forward and try to do anything in the field of anti-oppression, in my opinion, because I won't understand why I think what I think. I won't understand why I'm viscerally reacting in my body to something. You know, at the start we talked about, it seemed like we were really focusing a lot on the Zazen of speech and the Zazen of thought. But the Zazen of body seems to me, again, equally as part of that ball of wax, can't be ignored either, because, you know, I was in a webinar today on anti-oppression work and supporting people in social justice movements from an emotional, you know, in their emotional response to the work that they do. And the question of breath is so forefront in everyone's mind because of what happened to the man who was murdered in Minneapolis, but also because of COVID. This idea of breath being in the body is so, and how people are reacting, how they're putting their bodies on the line out there. The body is so intense right now, in a way that I think we don't let ourselves normally experience. But because we were in a pandemic, to me, it's like changed this moment so much. How we would react to the violence that we've witnessed if we weren't already, most of us, so focused on what's going on in our bodies in relationship to this virus, I think would be radically different. So to me, and that comes from my noticing what I'm experiencing. And that comes from Zazen for me, or that's embedded in Zazen. So it's so difficult for me to pull out one thread. They're so intensely intertwined.
Yeah, I feel like you're finding it. It's like that point of praxis. I mean, it is I guess anti-oppression happens in the moment. Like everything else does.
Indeed it does. I mean, we keep acting out these deep-held ideas. And so we keep acting them out and keep perpetuating them. And they are in the moment. And they arrive out of the condition of the past, as we looked at last week. They arrive long out of the condition of the past, and as Brian expressed, that it's so deeply embedded in our culture from past that we don't even question it. We don't even question or think about what we think. So it's hard to know. I mean, what I think is very exciting is to see so many young people out demonstrating on this very matter about systemic racism, because it gives me great hope to think that they may not carry it in the same way. They may not. I mean, I don't know what percentage. I've got to say that 20% of young people are out marching in this country. It only takes 20% to make a change. So I have great hope for those young people who are putting themselves on the line and standing and saying, I can't breathe, or saying, don't shoot me, or Black Lives Matter, all the things that they are saying on the line. I have great hope that change will come. At least it will be in youth. We will not cling on to that painful past. We have so much to atone for, so much atonement. Oh, goodness.
I guess, as you say
So
that,
a few moments.
Say again?
please.
Will, go ahead.
Oh, it was just a moment of hope, I think, from what Itaroshi was saying. I think that's what gives me hope. It's like the worse the situation gets, the more untenable it becomes. And I think our situation is so dire, I can't imagine it lasting very long.
Allow me to add to what Ada was observing. Cedar and I have been registering voters now, not so much in the last 2 months, but previously registering voters at South Sound Community College and at Evergreen and even some of the high schools. And it is so wonderful to see not just the enthusiasm, but the energy from the people that were registering, particularly those who are in their early 20s who are going to vote for the first time. There's just a great positive vibe out there that's very encouraging to us.
Good to hear. Very good to hear. All right, friends, let's take a look at the 3 essential elements of Zazen practice. As time goes by very quickly in this hour. So Roshi says there are 3 elements you cannot do without in Zen practice. Asking a master about the Dharma, 2, the practice of Zazen, and 3, observing the precepts. We cannot do without those. So he then talks about, people who just become so attached to Zazen and you can lose your way. There's a kind of a Zen madness if you get so attached to Zazen that you are running around in some sort of haze or, Zazen mind of some kind. I don't mean Zazen mind, but you're in a fog of Zazen, as it were, which is not correct. It is not correct Zazen. We should, as we sit Zazen, we should be able to respond to anything that occurs, an emergency or something, to be able to immediately bring ourselves to the assistance of somebody next to us or what have you, something like that. But being able to ask, so I want to say that about, the word master is used because that is what Harada Roshi would use. In the United States, we tend to say the word teacher rather than master. But I want to say that another function of Sangha is when 2 Sangha members engage in discussion together about the Dharma. The most important point is the formation of the question, not necessarily the answer. To be able for each one of us to form the question is the hard part. And the answer, it runs right behind the question. If you get the question, you've got the answer. So in that sense, I just want to enlarge on Harada Roshi's notion of ask a master. So in a sense, if you speak with other Sangha members, or maybe you go and have a coffee together, that is a kind of dokusan together, provided it is the Dharma that you are engaging in discussing. a kind of dokusan. So the same thing then, if you ask the Dharma question, we ourselves answer our own questions, or when somebody in the Zendo asks a question, we each should answer it. We answer it in our own way, and that is also our practice. So, but he says, you know, if you don't have somebody to ask, if you don't have a teacher, you are better to stop practicing temporarily. Practicing is like crossing an ocean without a chart. There's always the danger of unknown reefs. And I can agree with that, as over the years I have seen numerous students come who have never engaged with a teacher and have chosen to simply practice alone. And so because of that, they get very set. They may get very set in their ways and are unable to engage with either Sangha or a teacher. The Sangha is also a teacher. So they become unable to engage. So he is suggesting that if you don't have a Sangha or you don't have a teacher, then you are better to wait until you find those so that you don't get off track. Because once again, as we were saying a little bit earlier, the function of Sangha is also to keep us on track, to keep us from going into too extreme a place. Any questions about that?
I have a question about Sangha. This has been
Yes.
kind of coming up for me a little bit, and you know, being someone who's not intimately connected with this Sangha on a daily basis or a frequent basis, I suppose I've expanded my notion of Sangha, and I sit with other Buddhists as well, but I also have come to think of Sangha as a community of practice, and there are several non-Buddhist groups that I'm involved in. One is a recovery group, and one is a group working on race equity issues. And even though we're not discussing Buddhism, I feel, for me, fundamentally, it feels to me like we are discussing the Dharma in those conversations. And I refer to those groups that I'm part of as Sangha, as communities of practice.
Well,
Is
that is quite correct, Brian.
Okay.
I mean, essentially, the whole world is Sangha, and we do not exclude anyone from that. We have a universal practice. In that sense, then everybody belongs to Sangha. So that is a correct view.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Yeah, completely. Yeah. So, anything else?
In that regard, I was when you spoke, Edo-san, about the protesters.
Recommended to every governor to deploy the national.
I hear Donald Trump for a moment there.
Yes.
Okay, but just to
ubiquitous.
Just to bring it back from the Donald to the clarion Dharma voice of young people of color speaking truth to power and putting their bodies in a liberating position. That's Sangha too.
Yes, completely. I mean, this is what is so great, and as you say, speaking truth to power. This is completely happening. Young people are immediately doing that in these past 9 days, and it's so stunningly beautiful. And we all have some sense of hope. We know that there has been violence with some of the people who are disruptive in that, but it has come to a peaceful demonstration, and it's not letting up. Many people are still out there, so it is stunningly beautiful to see.
So does Sangha include then all sentient beings,
Yes.
which includes the voice we just heard a moment
Absolutely.
ago?
Unfortunately. Yes, it does. I mean, this is our condition. Like it or not, it's our condition. And how we deal with that is excruciatingly difficult right now. I mean, who has not equally not called him names? And he's a major name caller. And it is so difficult not to return some kind of name. Very, very difficult practice we have.
Exactly. I mean, jumping ahead to the first sentence on page 129, the last essential element is observing the precepts.
Yes.
This involves leaving all things as they are without interfering or imposing your own opinions on the way things are. Well, how the hell do we do that? I mean,
Right
as
now,
we're speaking,
I don't understand.
you know, we all have opinions about this amoral, narcissistic monster in the White House. And so perhaps I'm conflating the relative with the absolute language that Harada sometimes speaks in.
Well, the thing is, I think we said it last week or sometime, when awakening is not manifested completely in the world, it's in the world that we have to take care of it. I mean, we don't just say, oh, Donald Trump is awakened like the rest of us and leave it at that. It's not correct. That's not a correct view. The issue is that suffering is being caused by one particular person and his cohorts. Mm-hmm. And so our job is to face that and to understand that our work is in the relative world until enlightenment is manifested within that very realm.
Isn't it in large part also looking at our how we allow suffering, how we cause ourselves to suffer in relationship to that observation of someone who causes suffering?
Say that again, please. So,
see if I can say it a little bit more simply. So,
well, I got it, but just please say it again. Yeah.
So, looking at our own response to the conditions, such as Donald Trump, and examining how our response to him or his behaviors creates our own suffering, how we create our own suffering by virtue of the way that we are engaging with that being.
So you know, the problem is that what is happening is not correct. And it has to be seen as not correct. We have to, when we see suffering and the actions of suffering, we have to say that that is not correct. That is not correct behavior. And so we each ourselves have to figure out how to be equanimous while at the same time we negate what he is doing. We have to say that that is not correct behavior. We are all engaged in that suffering. Mm-hmm. And how we are able to move ourselves in an equanimous way is what our practice is, but nothing is easy. And what he is doing is wrong, and we have to say so.
I think that there's a very important element to this. I think like the best term for it is falsifiability. It's sort of the idea that if someone makes a claim that you can't imagine not being true, then it doesn't communicate information. And sort of, I think, like, thinking of like the Sangha as universal is one such non-falsifiable idea. I think in some sense, yes, like there is universality in like human worth and value in people's way-seeking mind, but at the same time, if everyone's a Buddhist, then there is no Buddhism.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think it's very important to kind of make that divide somewhere. And he is not way-seeking. He is not a Buddhist. He is not a member of our Sangha.
True. Yes.
Like, not everything is the Dharma from a relative perspective.
Well, if
Mm-hmm. Go ahead.
Oh yeah, I think that I'd rather like the part about everyone is the Sangha. I think he may not be wayfinding, but I think what to reference what Brian's talking about, it's a two-way street. And I mean, Ado put it better than I'm going to put it, but it's basically, we have to do as much as we're responsible for, and that's all we can do. At some point, it's on him, his actions. So, I mean, yes, our suffering may be, incumbent on our response to someone else's actions, but if that person is actively just murdering people, that's them. That's on them. That's not. So yeah, and we have to be equanimous and compassionate in our response to that. But nonetheless, he's like a misbehaving, ignorant member of the Sangha. I still think he's a member of the Sangha. Just to put just look at it from a different point of view.
Yeah.
And in the sense of Sangha members being, as Edo-san, you said, to help us polish our practice. I mean, Donald Trump is, he creates so much opportunity for practice.
Right.
Opportunity for opening up, right? I mean, it's, so,
Yeah.
it's in one way you could say it's our good fortune to be able to rub shoulders with this being because of what it's awakening within us.
Yeah. So our first precept, of course, is, which is started this conversation, is not killing life. Now we know that we can't eat without killing something, even if it's plants. That's still killing something to take in. And I myself have thought a great deal about this. And I know that I personally am not a pacifist. If somebody came at me and tried to kill me, I would try to kill them back, which is not a pacifist. And the point is that no killing life includes my life, and that nobody has a right to take my life or anyone's life. So that my response would be to say, no killing life. You don't get to kill this life. And I would do my best to remain living. And I feel some way in that the man is killing life in its sense, killing the joys and the celebrations that we feel and the qualities in our culture and in our country that we thrive on and that we look to, that are part of our identity. And he is killing those. And so, our response then is so difficult. It is just plain difficult because we have to stand up and also say, you can't do that. I mean, we have to be able to say what you are doing is wrong. And I know Harada Roshi says no opinions, but if you see something is wrong, it's wrong. It just is.
Yeah, I interpret that as no preconceptions you're bringing into the situation. I mean, the situation, if something's just wrong, it's just wrong.
It is.
Yeah.
I related that section back to what we read on page 122 last week, where he talks about, we talked about going forth in the world, and he said if only one or two people who really understand the law of cause and effect came forward, it would help to point the world in a good direction. And so my margin scribbling for this week, I said, our task is to witness to cause and effect. So, you know, that's complicated, but, you know, I see harm being done. I can speak to what I think is the cause and the effect. I'm not omnipotent. I can only say what I witness to.
Yeah. But I also want to say that I don't think that we can proclaim in Buddhism or even in Zen Buddhism that there's just one path or one way of doing, or that we should be so protective of Zazen either, that if any one person says, I must go out and demonstrate, or I must go out and join engaged Buddhism, or I must engage in such and such, that's their salt march. And that has to be honored. And I would never suggest that anybody wouldn't have their salt march. That deep down, they feel they must take some kind of action. You must take that action. Whether I see it as, you know, just a moral stance that is whatever it is, it's not my decision. That we each have our own conscience and decision about what we face and what we feel we must speak to. So, so there's no one answer to any of this at all, as far as Mr. Trump is concerned.
There is a difference, though, in taking action in Zazen and taking action outside of Zazen.
Well, there is no outside of Zazen.
Well, just going back to the, well, I don't know.
I mean, the fellow, the man, the first monk in Vietnam who immolated himself, who burned himself, he sat with great discernment before he chose to do that, which was taking life. But he knew he had to do that. My first teacher, Kobun Roshi, said that he knew that man. And he knew that he had stood in the deepest center of Dharma that he could. And then he felt the most effective action he could to help stop the war was to set himself on fire, which is, of course, to take life. And he did. And that helped change the war. That was so shocking to us. That was so unbearable to watch that man burn up, the photograph of him on fire. But that was his salt march. And nobody could tell him that was his thing. It was so, he had to do that.
And we're back to Sangha again, the function of protecting one another's conscience-driven actions.
Well, the man did it in conscience. I mean, he examined his conscience and he said, that is what I must do to help stop this war. I give my life so that other lives may be saved. I mean, it was just that. And so, you know, if somebody says, I need to take action in some particular way, provided it is not a criminal action, then that's their salt march. And we might, as a Sangha, question the person just to make sure that the person is balanced and is sure of what that action is. But, you know, if anybody here in our group tonight said, oh, yeah, I want to enjoy, you know, I want to become an engaged Buddhist, we're not going to question the person. We're going to say, well, good for you. I don't have to know. I don't have what it takes to be an engaged Buddhist.
No, under certain regimes, you could even suggest that a criminal activity would be just.
It could be. It certainly could be. Yeah. So
Isn't the Dharma engaging us all as Buddhists? I know engaged Buddhism is a particular practice.
Yeah.
But Zazen of body, speech, and thought is engaged Buddhism. It has to be, doesn't it?
You could say that, but it's the engaged Buddhism we're talking about is very specific. It's a social action. And well, yes, it could be a social action on our part also, but it's a different meaning of what we do. So, but all I mean to say here is that we can't decide really for one another exactly what that, how we follow the precepts, or what that is, observing the precepts. We all begin where we begin, with the precepts, and we all have to decide for ourselves what our actions are, and be awake to the underlying issues that foment our kinds of actions. So, so we can't be the moral police of one another, I guess is what I'm saying. That the Sangha can't be a moral policeman of one another,
How we respond to contemporary politics makes me think of sort of an overall impression I have with Harada, in particular these last few pages. And that is, our practice should not be passive, it should not be insular. If I understand correctly, our Zazen should be welcoming. It should be an all-embracing activity, which gets back to what Brian was saying, that we are given a tremendous opportunity to hone our practice in these incredible times, but what a huge challenge.
Yes.
And the challenge is to do it without taking ownership for our own suffering, but to respond from a place of strength and a place of clarity. And I think that's one of the marvelous benefits of Zazen. It enables us to find that strength and that clarity, and to release, to the degree we can, our own suffering from these moments.
So Harada Roshi says that on 129, just second paragraph up from the bottom. When the power of Zazen is weak, you end up going off in the direction of whatever condition arises. Mm-hmm. When the power of Zazen is strong, no matter what arises, Zazen is right there. It is easy to realize the way if you sit like that. So, in essence, then we are, hopefully sitting with deep strength right at this time, as we are in the center of this great challenge of racial issues, of political issues, of military bayonets being pulled out. I mean, this is very difficult to stomach, to think that our military were called forth with bayonets against the people. This is very, very difficult for us. And so we do each have to think, when do I stand up and declare this is wrong? And how do I do it? So, but my friends, we come to a time when it's time to not talk anymore. So anyway.
Edo-san, can I just say, as a visitor over these last few weeks to your Dharma on Wednesday, how profoundly touched I am by the opportunity to be with you. And thank you very much. And for as long as we're Zooming, I would like to keep coming.
Well, nobody thinks of you as a visitor, Gilda. You're here.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. You were on the with Joan. Did you come with Joan? Is Joan the one who brought you to this, or?
No, Edo-san, I found you on my own.
Oh, okay.
I found you on my own. Okay. I had heard of you when I was a sister at St. Placid's 20 years ago.
Oh my gosh.
I had heard of you, but I just found you on my own. So I'm very grateful.
Gosh.
Thank you.
Oh my gosh. Oh, that's lovely. Lovely. Well, you know, you're one of us. You are one of us, Gilda. Lovely to see you. So anyway, and Utah, how great. I mean, how great of you to get up at this time of night and to join us. It's so terrific. Could
thank
you
you
come
that I could join you in Zooming. I have to come down a little bit here.
Yeah, so we can see your
And,
face. I want to see your face. Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. All these years and
thank you very much, Edo-san. It felt a bit like being with you in the Sendo.
Yeah.
And it's so amazing that this distance over the ocean.
Yeah.
Is.
Let's get together on a private Zoom and talk to one another, okay? Can you arrange it? And I'll, you know, like noon at my time is better for you. At least it's not too late.
Yeah. I would be very thankful about that to do that.
Let's do it. Yeah, please arrange it. Email me what's a good time for you, please. Okay.
I think I will have a great working day now because I'm full of energy. Because I will go under the shower now and then drive to work.
Yeah. Yuta works with the disabled, and she teaches the disabled and in all kinds of aspects of their lives. So she does very particular, wonderful work. Talking about engaged Buddhism. I mean, that kind of service work is outstanding. So very beautiful work. So she's also a master gardener and a master ecologist and all of those other things too. And she sends pictures of gorgeous scenes from Germany, which I'm going to put up on our newsletter. So, okay. All right. Okay, thank you,
nice.
everyone. Yeah, we're just going to finish chanting, and you turn your sound off, and we'll just chant in Meijigu Kanon Gyo. And Meijigu Kanon Gyo, Kanzeon Namu Butsu Yo Butsu In Yo Butsu En Buppo So En Joraku Gajo Chonen Kanzeon Bonen Kanzeon Nen Nen Jushin Kinen Nen Furishin Kanzeon Namu Butsu Yo Butsu In Yo Butsu En Buppo So En Joraku Gajo Chonen Kanzeon Bonen Kanzeon Nen Nen Jushin Kinen Nen Furishin Kanzeon Namu Butsu Yo Butsu In Yo Butsu En Buppo So En Joraku Gajo Chonen Kanzeon Bonen Kanzeon Nen Nen Jushin Kinen Furishin. May the merit of this sutra extend to each thing in all places, so that we and all sentient beings may together be the Buddha way. All Buddhas, 10 directions, 3 times. All beings, bodhisattvas, mahasattvas, wisdom beyond wisdom, maha prajna paramita. Thank you, everyone. You're so good, your discussions, you're such great minds. Wonderful.
So wonderful to see you all.
Same. Please take care of yourselves, everybody. Keep well.